Hey guys, welcome to White Coat Chronicles. So last week I did a video on how to get accepted into medical school where I talked about some of my personal experiences, and this week I'm going to be doing a video on medical school interview tips. So at this point you've submitted your primary application and your secondary application, so now this is just the last step into getting your acceptance to medical school. So the first thing is research the school. Go to the school's website, figure out their mission statement, their curriculum, their grading system, any special programs they have like MD, MPH, or MD, PhD. Are they a research heavy school or they focus on primary care? And then figure out how all of that relates to you, because during the interview they're gonna ask you why you're interested in attending that particular school. There's so many medical schools out there, so why choose them over the other ones? So really reflect on and research, what the school offers, and then figure out what you're interested in and be able to express that in your interview. And it can be something as simple as, you like the free student-run clinic that they have and you want to be a part of that, or you really like the curriculum that they offer and you feel like you're going to thrive in that curriculum. But just be able to really express why you're interested in the school and why you feel you'll be the best fit for that school. So the next thing is know your application front and back. Anything that you wrote on your primary application or your secondary application is fair game for your interviewer to ask you. So you could have submitted your application in July and you're not interviewing until December or January because the application cycle is just so long. And so say for instance you wrote about attending some research conference your sophomore year in college. If you don't go back and review your application before your interview, you're not going to remember that, and they can bring that up during the interview and ask you, you did so-and-so activity, tell me about that experience. So you really want to make sure you're prepared and you know every single detail of your application. Also, be prepared to address any red flags that you may have in your application. So that may be a low MCAT score, or it may be a semester in college where you just didn't do so great as far as your GPA. So those things may come up during your interview, so be prepared to just address those red flags. So the next tip is go on mock interviews and look up practice interview questions. So mock interviews are extremely helpful. So you can go to your school's career center and schedule one, or if you don't have access to that, if you're not in school currently, then you can just do some practice interview questions with maybe a friend or a family member. But it's nice to just simulate a real life interview experience. After my first mock interview, I realized how much I say which I still do, but after that mock interview I was just more mindful of that. So during the mock interview they ask just the general questions like, why do you want to be a doctor, tell me about yourself, what are your strengths and weaknesses. So these may seem like straightforward questions, but just imagine going on your first real medical school interview and that being the first time you really said those answers out loud. So the mock interview just provides a sense of comfort, and you can really practice articulating the way you want to give your responses to these questions. So I recommend going to Student Doctor Network. It's a online forum for pre-med students and even pre-dental students and pre-pharmacy students. But they have an interview feedback section where they have a list of all the medical schools and then all the past questions that have shown up during the interview. So I use this resource, and about 2 or 3 of the questions that I saw on the website actually showed up during my, or actually came up during my interview. So it's a good resource to use, and it's another way to help you prepare for your interview. My next tip is be prepared for anything. So you can either have a closed file interview or an open file interview. So an open file interview, they have access to your primary application, your secondary application, transcript, test scores, all of that. But with the closed file interview, all they know is your name. So during that interview, you really have to be the one, talking and really expressing who you are, your strengths, and really letting them know who you are. So I feel the closed file one is more difficult than the open file interview. My experience with the closed file interview, so I introduced myself, and the first thing he says is, what do your parents do for a living? How many siblings do you have? And what do they do for a living? I thought that was pretty odd to start off with as the first question. So I go ahead and answer that, and then eventually I start talking about some of my passions, some of my interests, and why I want to be a doctor, and how I want to serve the underserved and African American communities. And then I'm Nigerian, by the way, and then he looks at me and says, but you're not black, you can't relate. I said, excuse me, what do you mean by that? And then he says, your descendants aren't slaves, so you can't relate to the African American experience. So that's why I go back to the point of be prepared for anything. There's certain interviews known as stress interviews where the interviewer just, you know, says certain things or asks you certain questions that are meant to kind of like push your buttons just to like try to get a reaction out of you. I don't think this particular interview was a stress interview, but you know, I kept my composure and I went ahead and responded and just expressed, you know, regardless of your background or where you're from, you can still have a particular passion or a particular interest to help a certain community. And for me, that particular community was the African American community and, you know, the underserved community. And then he says, but you can't relate, you didn't grow up in that community. So at this point, you know, it doesn't make sense to go back and forth with your interviewer. Like I said, just be prepared for anything, keep your composure, and always keep it professional. So I just smiled and just moved on to the next question. So my 5th tip is to ask questions. At the end of your interview, your interviewer is going to ask you if you have any questions for them. Of course, you shouldn't say no because it's going to make it seem like you're uninterested. So I suggest asking a question that you can't find on the school's website. So during your interview, you're going to hear about how great the school is, about how the students excel, about how they'll make you a great physician, and all these things that make the school positive. But you don't really hear any of the negatives or the drawbacks to the school. So for me, I wanted to know what were some of the negatives of the program, or what were some of the drawbacks. You know, not every school is perfect. Every school has their downsides. So as a future student possibly attending that school, I feel like it's important to know that information. And also, it's important to ask the students at the school questions. You know, during your tour, it's typically given by maybe a 2nd or 3rd year student, and they're going to be a valuable resource to really know what the school is like. So make sure you ask your interviewer a question and ask the students at the school questions as well. So my final tip is to just relax, you know, be yourself and enjoy the day. It's so easy to become so anxious and psych yourself out on interview day, but just think of it as just having a conversation with somebody and just letting somebody know who you are. I think it's kind of easy to tell when somebody's not being their self or when they're doing too much. So I mean, the interview day is so long. It's 2 interviews plus a tour and lunch in between. So just try to enjoy the day, you know, make the most of it. And at this point, you're one step closer to getting an acceptance into medical school. So I hope these tips were helpful and useful in some way. And make sure you check out Student Doctor Network. They have a lot of valuable information and it's a really good resource for the application process. So good luck to you wherever you are in your application process. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.